Solo Leveling by Gong. Chapter 69 Pride and Delusion. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. As 3 days passed since the first appearance of the multiple large gates over 8 different countries, things began to grow critical for them and their neighboring countries. With no one offering any solutions to this crisis, angry citizens hit the streets to protest and demand some answers. The news switched back and forth between showing the gates and reporting on the increasing number of demonstrations. It is hour 75 since these massive gates first appeared. The government has yet to. I see a group of citizens marching and waving signs demanding some kind of response from the government. The number of people joining these protests continues to grow. The demonstrations have gotten more intense. It's like a powder keg out there. This hadn't happened in Korea when the Seoul monolithic gate spawned. Experts were quick to analyze why, and the answer was simple. First, the Hunters Association of Korea had made the decision to immediately assemble all their hunters as soon as the gate appeared. Second, the Korean people had the peace of mind knowing that they had someone on their side who surpassed even national-level hunters. An expert panelist on some TV special explained, Hunter Jin Woo-sung handled 2 S-rank dungeon breaks, the ones with the ant and giant-type magic beasts, almost entirely by himself. The 2 most infamous incidents in the past year were handled by Hunter Sung. The entire world had paid close attention to the incidents in both Japan and Jeju Island. The network that had the exclusive broadcasting rights for the Jeju Island raid made 3 times their annual profits on that single day. What else needed to be said? The host nodded in agreement as the expert tapped his temple with his finger. It's inevitable that South Korea would grow to believe that Hunter Sung is capable of dealing with any and all threats. For this reason, the citizens of Korea have remained relatively calm despite the appearance of the monolithic gate in the sky above Seoul and its population of 10 million people. The expert panelist ended by strongly emphasizing how the existence of Hunter Sung was an incredible blessing to Korea. However, not every country was as lucky. Powerful hunters were rare and unevenly spread throughout the world. Naturally, countries where gates had appeared despite their hunter strength being on the lower end were having to deal with more riots. Many people were demanding the recruitment of as many high-rank hunters as possible, even if it meant that they had to pay higher taxes. Even wealthy citizens known for their distaste for taxes surprised their governments with offers of financial assistance in order to save their homeland. As tensions mounted by the minute, bigwigs from all over the world gathered in Seoul as representatives of their respective countries per the request of the Hunters Association of Korea. They were all after the same thing: information about the 8 massive gates that had simultaneously appeared across the globe. They'd been informed that this information would come straight from Hunter Jin Woo-sung himself, so their expectations were quite high. Hugh, David Brannon let out a small sigh. The director of the Hunter Command Center had elected to go to Korea in order to escape the constant phone calls from the President of the United States. He looked at those around him as he wiped sweat from his forehead. Tons of people came, I see. Presidents, secretaries of state, guild masters, and the heads of hunters' organizations. The director recognized most of the faces in the auditorium. They were individuals whose names were well known by the general public. Brennan wiped sweat off his chin as he surveyed the anxious faces of those around him. Regardless of their title, everyone here is under a lot of pressure. Although they were pretending to be calm and collected in their seats, Brennan knew very well that internally, they were biting their nails with worry. It was the same for him. How wonderful would it be if Hunter Sung said that these gates were also not a big deal? If David could report that to his superiors, it would get the president off his back. This was a chance for him to salvage his dignity. However, if it just so happened to be bad news, the very thought of this made the director's heart sink. He checked the time in nervous anticipation. It was 2:55. 5 minutes until the scheduled announcement. Tick-tock. David grimaced as he listened to the unusually loud ticking of his watch. Meanwhile, Jinwoo turned to Bellion after completing his inspection of the Shadow Army. What happens to the armies without monarchs? The marshals of those armies will lead those soldiers. Bellion elaborated that the army of giants, whose king had been kidnapped by the rulers, had been led by the marshal for some time now. Jinwoo nodded in understanding. A marshal being able to lead an army in place of its master explained why 8 gates had still spawned despite the deaths of some of the monarchs. A question then popped into Jinwoo's head. If I die, will you lead the Shadow Army? Bellion shook his head. Our lives are yours, my lord. If you closed your eyes forever, we would also return to the void. The soldiers would live for as long as their master did. The absolute loyalty of the Shadow soldiers, who existed for their master without a care for their own lives, was one of the strengths of the Shadow Army. On the other hand, should their master meet his end, it would also be their end. Strength and weakness were opposite sides of the same coin. Strengths could become weaknesses and vice versa. If this was something the enemy could take advantage of, then could Jinwoo not exploit it as well? Jinwoo's eyes blazed as he was in deep thought. Just then, another voice came from next to him. My lord! It was Igris. In the event of an all-out war, we stand no chance at victory. His deep voice resonated in the space between them. Jinwoo had been communicating regularly with the knight, but he still wasn't used to hearing Igris's voice. Igris's armor looked light and sleek, but the voice that came out of it was a heavy bass befitting of a great knight who once led hundreds of soldiers when he was human, before the Shadow Monarch brought him back to life. But I still can't get over the weird contrast. Whether or not Igris was aware of Jinwoo's dilemma, he continued. Unlike the previous Shadow Monarch, who had grown weary about the coming war and stopped maintaining his army, the monarchs have kept at it all this time. What do you think the difference in combat power is? It was Bellion who replied. We do not know for sure, but it will at least be 100-fold. Baru had no insight he could provide on the other armies, so he quietly listened to the exchange between his master and the other marshals. Jinwoo looked grim. 100-fold meant that the enemy had at least 10 million soldiers. 100-fold, Jinwoo muttered. I wasn't planning on a full-scale war, though. He had never considered going head-to-head with the armies, because the way he maneuvered his army wouldn't work if he did. Jinwoo mentally drew up his future battle plans. VRRR, VRRR. Jinwoo pulled his vibrating phone out of his pocket. Before he could say anything, a familiar voice came from the other side. Hunter-sung, this is Jinchul Wu. Yes, President Wu. The representatives have gathered in the auditorium as you requested. Are you on your way here? Jinwoo looked over his shoulder before answering Jinchul. There lay evidence of a brutal battle. Fissures, cracks, and holes littered the ground as far as he could see. Trees that once dotted the forest were nowhere to be seen. This was the result of the simulations run by the Shadow Army after being split into 3 units. The man-enhanced land was in ruins from the impact. Jinwoo had informed the Hunters Association of Japan about the practice in advance, but the supervisors who had been watching were unable to hide their shock at the clash of magic power. What they had witnessed was the true might of the Shadow Army. Jinwoo also bore witness to this power. From his vantage point, he was able to size up his army's abilities, and he was satisfied with the results. Jinwoo's eyes moved from what was behind him to what was in front of him. More than 100,000 soldiers knelt before Jin Wu. They stayed perfectly still as they awaited his command. When Jin Wu took too long to answer, Jinchul carefully called his name. "Hunter Sung?" Jin Wu grinned. "Yes, I just got here." "You arrived? When did you?" Jinchul had ordered his subordinates to let him know as soon as Jin Wu arrived. As he turned around, he found Jin Wu standing directly behind him. "Oh!" Jinchul gasped and stood there blinking for a moment. He then smiled and hung up. "I guess it's pointless to ask for an ETA." Jin Wu gave a shrug and a smile in response. The two men stood in the waiting room of the auditorium. Beyond the door, the seats were filled with representatives from different countries dying to see Jin Wu. Jinchul checked the time on his phone. It was 2 minutes to showtime. There was still a little time left. Jinchul somehow felt relieved as he looked at Jin Wu. "Hunter Sung, are you planning to tell them the truth?" "Yes, I am. If civilians learn the truth, it will be chaos. Some countries won't be able to handle that chaos either." "I know." That much was obvious. Even the rulers had been aware that this would occur, which was why they had kept their intentions secret until the very end. But if the end of the world was nigh, didn't the people have a right to know? Wouldn't that be better than dying in ignorance? Thus, Jin Wu had decided to tell the truth. He wasn't the only one who would need to mentally prepare. Seeing the determination on Jin Wu's face, Jinchul nodded. "I understand. If that's what you really think." Jin Wu walked past Jinchul and toward the door leading into the auditorium. But then Jinchul realized something and urgently called to him. "Excuse me, Hunter Sung." Jin Wu turned around with a puzzled look as Jinchul pursed his lips. "There are reporters out there, too." "Oh." Jin Wu looked at his clothes. He was filthy from the training he'd been doing with his soldiers. What should I do? He didn't want to make a big fuss and go somewhere else just to change clothes. And he couldn't buy clothes from the system shop like before. Wait a minute. The system shop? He could no longer use the shop because the system was gone. But the power used to sustain the shop had been the Shadow Monarchs. Theoretically, he should be able to make clothes then. And there was one set he was confident he could make it this time. Whoosh! Black smoke filled the room and wrapped around Jin Wu's body as if it were alive. "Huh?" Jinchul jerked back in surprise. The black smoke transformed into black armor. "How's this?" Hunters often wore armor to protect themselves against powerful magic beasts. When a mighty hunter like Jin Wu put on armor, it made him seem even more unapproachable. Jinchul was rendered speechless for a second at Jin Wu's majestic appearance. "It SS suits you." Jin Wu smiled dryly. "I'll take that as a compliment." Jin Wu returned his attention to the door and slowly made his way into the auditorium. The buzzing room was quieted immediately. Hunter Jin Wu sung. "He's here." Everyone was focused on the person at the podium. Jin Wu organized the different thoughts that crossed his mind as he scanned the crowd. He was about to tell these people what was going to happen in the near future. That 8 powerful armies bent on the destruction of the world were on their way. That each of those armies was made up of soldiers from the world of chaos. And that humanity didn't stand a chance against them. How would the eagerly awaiting representatives react once they learned the truth? Jin Wu's expression turned a little grim as the nerves got to him. Everyone held their breath and strained to hear him. One could hear a pin drop in the auditorium. After a beat or two, Jin Wu focused mana on his vocal cords so that he wouldn't need a mic. "It will be a difficult time for everyone." His voice gently echoed throughout the quiet auditorium. He could hear the representatives swallow nervously as their hearts raced. Strangely, as their heartbeats got faster, his own stabilized. "I'm feeling calmer." Jin Woo smoothly continued his explanation. "But no one can ignore this. They will appear before you and destroy everything you love." How were these representatives supposed to take this? By the time he finished, they were unable to hide the panic on their faces. Even the carefully vetted reporters had completely forgotten their jobs and were preoccupied with exchanging helpless looks. The auditorium exploded with noise. Finally, one fearful representative couldn't hold himself back and yelled at Jin Woo. "Do why you seriously expect us to believe that?" How could anyone accept that horrifying beings who were powerful enough to destroy everything on this planet were on their way? The older man desperately shouted, Show us the evidence. I won't believe you until you do." "That's right. What an absurd theory. You claim hundreds of magic beasts like Kamish will appear. That makes no sense." It was human nature to become enraged or dismissive when faced with the incomprehensible. The representatives directed their rage at the man behind the podium, willfully erasing the many miracles Jin Woo had shown them up to now. But Jin Woo silenced them with a single gesture. "God!" Multiple gates appeared behind Jin Woo. Gates were doorways that connected various dimensions, and Jin Woo was able to create dozens of them by using the Shadow Monarch's power. "It's faster for me to move through shadows, so there's no reason for me to use gates, but..." He couldn't think of a more efficient way to drive his point home, so he easily conjured up numerous human-sized ones. He returned his attention to the audience. Sure enough, everyone, whether they were the representatives, reporters, or employees of the Hunters Association of Korea, was gawking at the gates. "Those are all gates, right? How?" Hunter Jin Woo Sung made dozens of gates at once. And in front of all these people, even David Brannon, who had witnessed a dragon emerging from a dungeon break, kept rubbing his eyes in disbelief. "It's definitely working." Satisfied with people's reactions from his display of the Shadow Monarch's power, Jin Woo closed the gates. They vanished in the blink of an eye, as if they had never been there. "Oh no!" One devastated reporter quickly turned to another reporter. Did anyone film those gates? It doesn't matter if it's a cell phone or a camera. Did anyone get that on video?" "Oh!" Reporters buried their faces in their hands and let out disappointed cries. It had happened so quickly, and they hadn't been thinking straight. No one had thought to record any of it. The regretful moans of the reporters signaled the start of the outcry. The auditorium exploded with debates and discussions. "Hunter Jin Woo Sung." The representative from England suddenly stood up and shouted shrilly, "Maybe you're one of them. Those soldiers from the first massive gate. Maybe you summoned them here to kill us." Everyone froze at his accusation as they considered this terrifying possibility. The irrational fear that Jin Woo might be one of the enemies spread in people's minds like a plague. After all, gates represented a power from another world that led to fear and the deaths of so many. Jin Woo silently stared at the English representative. Soon, the representative realized that he had made a mistake. If Jin Woo was their ally, that had been a huge faux pas. If not, the representative had just put a target on his own back. "Of course, I do trust you 100%. His voice trailed off as his face turned pale. Jin Woo sighed and gave him a look that let him know just how pathetic he was. Jin Woo had already done his duty. He didn't feel the need to appease any of them. "Whether you believe me or not, accept what I've said or not, that's your choice. I've said what I've come here to say, so it's now on you." The reporters realized the presentation was coming to an end and hurriedly shook off their shock to start snapping some pictures. Koshak, Koshak, Koshak. As Jin Woo turned from the audience, the hand of the director of the Hunter Command Center shot up. Jin Woo acknowledged David, since he knew the man. "Director Brannon?" The director slowly rose from his seat. Once again, the auditorium grew quiet. Everyone here recognized the leader of the Hunter Command Center. "It's been a while, Hunter Sung." David politely bowed his head, and Jin Woo returned the gesture. The director continued, "We now understand what will come out of those gates." Tens of thousands of black magic beasts had come out from the first gate. Fortunately, they had been the soldiers sworn to serve Hunter Sung, who had coincidentally gained the Shadow Monarch's power. Those soldiers had submitted to the S-rank hunter right away. But they had received confirmation today that the ones appearing through the other gates would not be as friendly to humans. How, then, was humanity supposed to respond to those creatures? The director took a deep breath and asked, "How should we proceed?" Jin Woo looked at him, then slowly scanned the audience. He picked up on the concern, uneasiness, anxiety, fear, shock, and confusion on their faces and in their eyes. Possessing superhuman perception wasn't always a good thing. Jin Woo made up his mind and gave the best advice he could. "Please keep away from the gates. Put as much distance between them and yourselves as you can." The ripple effect of Jin Woo's announcement was tremendous. After all, this wasn't an announcement made by any random person. This was an announcement by Jin Woo Sung, the man who had accomplished jaw-dropping feats at the first massive gate. At his warning that the number of magic beasts projected to pour out of the gates would be difficult for humanity to deal with, people scrambled in fear to get as far away from said gates as possible. Every road was congested with cars, and the streets were filled with the ear-piercing honking of traffic. Jin Woo's picture graced the front page of every newspaper with the same 6-word caption, "Run as far as you can." It was enough to mobilize the whole world. However, as the number of people fleeing grew, so did opposition to it. Not everyone trusted Jin Woo's words. J. Mills, a hunter stationed in Canada where the biggest among the 8 gates had appeared, boldly spoke out against Jin Woo. "Tell him to stop spewing bullshit." The top Canadian hunter criticized Jin Woo in front of a live audience as a panelist on the Hunter channel. "If I knew how to reach Hunter Jin Woo Sung, I would have told him that myself. Anyone watching this can tell him for me." The host forced a smile to try to lighten the mood. Hold your horses there. Hunter Sung is one of the best hunters in the world, isn't he? How can we ignore a warning from a hunter of that caliber?" Jay was ranked 17th in the world. As a newbie with only 3 years of experience, he could not compare to Jin Woo. He had no choice but to acknowledge this disparity. "Yeah, of course Hunter Sung is a great hunter. He's powerful enough to knock down Thomas, and he has countless minions. But it doesn't matter how great the hunter is. We shouldn't trust every little thing he says. What evidence do you have that what he said isn't reliable, Hunter Mills?" Jay smirked. "What evidence does he have that it's all true?" As the host tried to come up with a rebuttal, Jay looked straight at the camera. "Here's what I think. The only reason those horrifying black creatures bowed down to Jin Woo Sung was because he was standing right in front of that gate in Seoul. Those magic beasts might have submitted to any hunter standing there." Jay pointed at the camera as if he was speaking directly to Jin Woo. "Hunter Sung, you don't get to hog all these gates for yourself. Other people may have been spooked by your bullshit, but you don't scare me. Not one bit." Beep. Jinchul turned off the TV, quietly put down the remote control, and looked to where Jin Woo was sitting. "Hunters in Canada are rallying behind J. Mills. It also looks like India and a few other countries with powerful enough hunters are preparing for raids of their own." Jin Woo just nodded quietly. The choice was theirs. As for him, it was time to focus on the battle against the monarchs.
The United States is watching your every move. It's not an exaggeration to say that the whole world is keeping an eye out for your next step.
Jinchul dithered before getting to the heart of the matter.
What are you planning to do, Hunter Sung?
Jinchul watched Jin Woo for a reaction. We must not get in his way. The truth was, he'd been hiding something from Jin Woo. The whole world was sending out SOS signals, asking for Jin Woo's help. There were so many requests that it was keeping him from focusing on his actual work. In particular, the United States, which shared a border with Canada, was begging for assistance. But the Hunters Association's purpose was to assist hunters so that they could concentrate on hunting magic beasts. In accordance with the principles President Go had laid out, Jinchul said nothing and awaited Jin Woo's decision. And Jin Woo had already made up his mind. It's impossible to fight all 8 armies at once. In that case, he elected to take care of the threat closest to South Korea, where his family lived. He would deal with the other monarchs later. His chance of victory would increase with each successive battle anyway. First up is... Jin Woo turned to Jinchul.
I'm going to China.
The hero of the Republic of Korea, China welcomes you. 1.5 billion people thank you, Hunter Sung. May Korea and China's friendship last forever. There were banners hung all over the airport, written in Korean so Jin Woo could read them. Ji Gang Lu, who was there to welcome Jin Woo, frowned at the banners covering every millimeter of the airport. It wasn't the sentiment that rubbed him the wrong way. China was ecstatic that Jin Woo had chosen them out of the 8 countries with massive gates. Ji Gang himself was immensely grateful to have Jin Woo to fight alongside him when the magic beasts emerged from the gate. Rather, he was disgruntled over how drastically different the people of China were reacting compared to when he'd stepped forward to help Korea. Do these people have no shame? The same people who had dared to label him a traitor were unanimously praising Jin Woo. That's why Ji Gang couldn't help but glare at the banners littering the airport. Had I not gone to Korea with our hunters back then, I wouldn't be able to face Hunter Sung right now. He clicked his tongue and turned toward a plane making its landing. He could tell that Hunter Sung was on that airplane. He felt a chill coming from the plane that made every hair on his body stand up. There was only one person in the world who could make him feel that way. Sure enough, government officials and executives from the Hunters Association of China chattered excitedly as they got up from their seats at the news that Hunter Sung had arrived. No, this isn't right. Already annoyed by the banners, Ji Gang was even less impressed by everyone's behavior. These were the same people who had opposed him when he had insisted on helping Korea. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a 7-star ranked hunter, they would have stopped him by using force. He couldn't let these cowards welcome the warrior who was risking his own life to save theirs. Ji Gang turned to his assistant.
Tell the president to cancel all welcoming plans. I will personally welcome and escort Hunter Sung. Pardon me, sir, but they...
The assistant hesitated and looked over his shoulder at the officials and executives behind them. The eavesdropping officials pretended to cough and feign ignorance. Ji Gang burst out laughing and walked up to them.
I want you all out of my sight right now. Does anyone have any objections?
Well aware of Ji Gang's bad temper, every single one of the officials and executives hightailed it out of there. The completely empty waiting area put a satisfied look on Ji Gang's face.
Now then, you were saying? All right. I will inform the president, sir.
As his assistant hurriedly made the call, Ji Gang walked toward the arrival gate as travelers poured out.
Hunter Sung is coming. Get a picture of him.
Kashak, 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 Kashak. Reporters had camped out at the airport all day in order to secure a good spot. Camera flashes went off as soon as they spotted Jin Woo. He scanned the airport with a puzzled look on his face. Didn't they say around 100 officials would be here? The handler from the Hunters Association of Korea accompanying him was just as flustered at the lack of an escort from the Hunters Association of China. But then Jin Woo smiled when he spotted a familiar face approaching.
Hunter Liu. Hunter Sung.
The two men exchanged a short, firm handshake befitting two warriors preparing for battle.
So where is everyone?
A grin spread across Jigang's face as he listened to the interpreter.
Well, they do say that Chinese people are quite impatient. They couldn't wait for you any longer and left, so I'll be escorting you, Hunter Sung.
Jin Woo felt like Jigang was leaving out a big part of the story, but he didn't press him any further, since he got along just fine with Jigang. Relieved that Jin Woo was okay with this, Jigang led him toward the exit.
This way, please.
However, Jin Woo stopped after a few steps. Jigang paused as well. Outside the airport's glass walls, Jin Woo could see part of the massive gate covering the sky.
That's...
Jin Woo's expression grew grim. Jigang solemnly said,
I don't have the power to deal with that thing.
If Jigang couldn't take care of it, there was no need to even mention other Chinese hunters, so he'd been beyond happy when he heard Jin Woo was coming. In order to express his gratitude, he carefully chose his next words and spoke with sincerity.
I can't speak for the rest of China, but I, Jigang Liu, will never forget your aid.
As the hour of the dungeon break crept closer and closer, news continued to break throughout the world. Hunter Jin Woo Sung chooses China. Japan and Russia have announced that they will send support for Hunter Sung. The airplane transporting hunters is scheduled to depart this afternoon. Meanwhile, it has been revealed that the White Castle discovered in an abandoned Japanese forest has nothing to do with the gates. With 5 hours left before the dungeon break, will Hunter Sung's warning be proven true? Or, Jay Mills ranted,
Japan and Russia are kissing Jin Woo Sung's ass.
To him, the reason why those two countries were helping China was obvious. They clearly wanted to curry favor with Jin Woo and score some brownie points in case they ran into trouble and needed his help in the future. China, Japan, and Russia were all weak. How could the hunters from those countries even call themselves hunters if they couldn't protect their own homeland? Meanwhile, Canadian hunters had assembled of their own volition in order to protect their country. We stand on guard for thee. Jay looked proudly upon the tens of thousands of hunters who had voluntarily gathered for this raid. The lies about running away from the gates hadn't fazed any of them.
Yay!
Their morale was so high, it pierced the sky. Canadian civilians had also gathered to support them from a distance. Canada never gives up. We don't run away. Our hunters will protect us and this land. The cheering people waved their signs to show their support for the hunters. As he looked up at the massive gate, Jay was confident in their victory. We'll defeat whatever magic beasts come out of there. Completely psyched, he turned to the other hunters and raised his hands.
Yay!
China was ready as well. The raid team consisting of hunters from several countries surrounded the area below the gate just as they'd done in Seoul. The mightiest force among them were the elite hunters from China. As expected of the country boasting the most hunters, there were more than 100,000 Chinese hunters here even after choosing only high-rank individuals. Although Jin Woo had warned them that besting the oncoming armies would be difficult for humans, the hunters started to hope that it might be possible with these numbers. As if challenging this assumption, Jin Woo summoned his shadow soldiers. Come out. Jin Woo had purposefully left room behind him for his army of 130,000 to fill. Whoosh! The spine-chilling energy that came from these soldiers made it harder for the hunters to breathe and broke them into a cold sweat. They're on a whole other level. Things like that will fall from the sky? Here? No way. They were struck with an overwhelming fear. Since they were high-rank hunters, they had extremely well-developed senses of perception, which were currently warning them of the danger posed by the beings before their very eyes. Jigang was not an easy man to surprise, but even he couldn't help but gasp.
Are all of these your minions, Hunter Sung?
Jinwoo nodded. He sensed that his soldiers' fighting spirits were as sharp as a knife. Good. Jinwoo looked up at the sky. Only a few minutes remained before the gate opened. He needed to not only win this battle, but also make as many of these soldiers from the world of chaos into his own. That would be the first stage of the war. The boisterous group of hunters went silent after the appearance of the Shadow Army. Everyone sensed that the big battle was imminent. Tension pressed down on their shoulders. Jinwoo swallowed hard. What kind of magic beasts would fall out of this gate? At that moment,
My lord!
Bellion informed his master that it was time. Jinwoo responded quietly, I know. Jigang was taken aback to see Jinwoo making casual conversation with his minion.
Hunter Sung, you can communicate with your...
Baru, who felt that Jigang was standing too close to Jinwoo, zipped in front of Jigang.
Grr!
Jigang felt murderous intent coming from the ant soldier.
Whoa!
Jigang shuddered and quickly stepped back. But Jinwoo knocked Baru on the back of his head.
He's on our side.
Baru continuously bowed at Jinwoo as he retreated. Jinwoo apologized to Jigang on Baru's behalf.
Sorry. He's just on edge because of this upcoming fight. It's okay.
Jigang gave up on trying to understand Jinwoo. He had a strong feeling that he'd never be able to apply common sense to the Korean man anyway.
It's opening.
Everyone looked up at the sky at the yell. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. The entrance to the gate was slowly opening. The hunter's chest tightened at the nerve-wracking moment. But nothing happened. Jinwoo was the one most surprised by this. He focused his perception, but didn't detect any presence from the other side of the gate. It was completely empty. What? Jinwoo felt goosebumps on the back of his neck as he thought of a possibility he'd never considered before. Could it be? He grew more uneasy as he became surer of his theory with each passing second. What? Hunters began to realize that something was wrong. Jigang urgently turned to the hunter in charge of communications.
What about the other locations? The other gates are the same. Nothing's happened. Are you saying all the other gates are empty too? I'm not sure.
Jigang spun to look at Jinwoo, but he couldn't bring himself to talk to him. The Korean man had frozen in place, stunned. Did he look like that because he had been wrong? No, Jinwoo's expression looked too intense for that to be all that was bothering him. I made a mistake. Jinwoo bit his lower lip as he realized he had made a miscalculation. Why? Why had Jinwoo underestimated the monarchs like this? They already knew he would use the strength of the Shadow Army. If Jinwoo was right, he headed straight to the hunter in charge of communications.
How about Canada? Pardon?
Upset, Jinwoo yelled at him.
I said, how about Canada?
At around the same time, the gate opened in Canada. Just like the other locations, nothing happened. The hunters who were raring to go looked curiously at one another.
What's going on? Didn't he say magic beasts would fall like rain? Was Jinwoo Sung exaggerating?
Suddenly, Jay spotted something and yelled at the other hunters.
Quiet!
He was the strongest hunter among them, and his command was laced with magic power. It compelled the others to shut their mouths. As the area fell into silence, Jay glared at the gate. Sure enough, a lone humanoid creature leisurely descended from it. No, not just a humanoid creature. It's an actual human. As the creature landed gently, Jay stopped the other hunters and approached the creature alone. He swallowed nervously. As he drew closer, Jay was able to clearly see that his opponent was a middle-aged man with dark red hair and a beard. He wore beautiful armor of silver and red that covered him from head to toe. The man looked at Jay as he approached. "Are you the king?" Although the man hadn't opened his mouth, his voice echoed inside Jay's head. Jay automatically understood him, as if he had spoken in a human language. Jay's heart started racing.
Yes, I knew it. I totally called it.
This was how Jin Woo had been able to take the soldiers under his command. He had probably communicated with them just like this.
That fraud. I told you something was up.
He was exhilarated at being correct. Unable to contain his excitement, he raised his fist up toward the other hunters. They raised their fists as well and cheered.
Oh!
Jay turned back toward the man who had been waiting quietly. So he asks the first person he sees if they're the king, and he submits to them if they say yes. He eyed the mystery man, unsure whether he was truly a human or if he was a magic beast. He then smirked.
What if I say that I am?
Jay could claim he was the king, since he was the leader of the hunters gathered here. There was a bold confidence in his voice. It seems he's not here. The man blinked, revealing bloodthirsty, reptilian eyes.